When the alien queen read my mind and announced to the entire court that I thought she looked lonely and wished someone would make her smile, I seriously considered whether spontaneous combustion was possible through sheer embarrassment. James Parker stood at attention in front of Queen Lyra Vel'Kari's throne. The diplomatic ceremony he had prepared for so long now felt like a nightmare, with every second stretching into an eternity under the Queen's gazeless stare. He cleared his throat and adjusted his formal ambassador attire as he waited for his turn to present credentials. The moment came too quickly. James stepped forward onto a dais as carved from obsidian stone that led up to the towering throne where Queen Lyra sat, her pale silver skin glowing with an otherworldly luminescence under the dim candlelight of the hall. He bowed deeply and began reciting his prepared speech about peace and mutual understanding. But as he looked up at the Queen again, after finishing his formalitas, really looking this time, felt a sharp pang in his chest. She was beautiful, undeniably so, but there was something else in her eyes, an emptiness that pierced through her regal exterior, like it was nothing more than a facade. James couldn't stop himself from thinking she looks sad. All this power and she looks like the lonely, this person in the room. And then those violet, almost ethereal eyes snapped to his with sudden interest. The air seemed to freeze around him as he froze mid-thought, realizing too late what had just happened. "The human thinks I look lonely," a soft yet commanding voice echoed through the chamber. Silence fell like a shroud over every soul present in that room. James' heart pounded so hard it felt like his blood would burst out of him at any moment. He turned pale, mortified to have had such private musings broadcasted across this alien court. "He wishes someone would make me smile," Queen Lyra continued with an unusual softness in her tone. Every noble present gasped or whispered amongst themselves, while James could only stare back up helplessly from his bowed position below the throne steps. The Queen's violet eyes bored deeply into him now, and he felt a chill run down his spine despite the oppressive heat of the room. "You think I am lonely," she said sharply without any pretense of formality, taking small deliberate strides toward him until they stood face to face. "Yet your first thought upon seeing me was concern for my well-being." She tilted her head slightly, as if examining a strange artifact, before asking in an almost conversational tone, "Not fear, not ambition, not desire for power." Her voice softened even further, adding weight to every syllable she spoke next. "Concern." James gulped heavily, and tried to muster some courage despite his trembling hands and stuttering mind. "Your Majesty," he stammered out weakly while desperately trying not to make eye contact with her. "I am so sorry. I did not know you could read minds." Queen Lyra silenced him with a wave of her hand, cutting off the rest of whatever excuse or apology he might have uttered next. "You did not know I could read minds," she said calmly but pointedly. "Yet your first thought upon seeing me was concern for my well-being." Her eyes were searching his face, as if trying to find some semblance of dishonesty or hidden agenda behind what James had just unwittingly revealed about himself and her situation. He tried again, forcing the words out through a dry throat. "You just looked sad. I wasn't thinking anything inappropriate. I was just—" He trailed off because there truly weren't any more explanations left to give. He already knew everything anyway. For what seemed like an eternity of tense silence between them and then some, Queen Lyra stared down at him thoughtfully, almost meditatively, before finally breaking the deadlock with a sigh. "I am intrigued by this unexpected kindness," she confessed softly after several long moments had passed since their initial confrontation. James blinked in surprise, unsure how to react now that everything was hanging precariously on her next move. He could feel every noble's eyes burning into him along with hers. "And confused," Lyra added quietly, as if speaking only to herself more than anyone else. "For the first time in centuries," she continued aloud, but still not quite meeting James's gaze directly, "I do not know how to respond." James swallowed hard once again, before looking up at her resolutely and stepping back slightly from where they stood face to face, so that he wouldn't seem too confrontational or disrespectful for what came next. He offered a slight nod of understanding. Then perhaps it is time we both learn something new today, he suggested cautiously. Her gaze flickered to him with surprise, and then softened ever so slightly as she nodded in return, her sharp features relaxing into a hint of the smile that his earlier. The throne room emptied quickly, the nobles and guards filing out in hushed whispers as Queen Lyra dismissed them with a wave of her hand. James stood rooted to his spot, unsure if he should leave or wait for further instructions. The silence that followed was thick, heavy enough to smother him. "James," she called softly, breaking through the quiet like glass shattering on stone. He turned slowly towards her, heart still racing for moments before as he ascended the dais and approached her throne. "I want you to follow me." Her voice held a rare softness that sent unexpected warmth spreading within James. He nodded mutely in response and followed her out of the grand hall into dimly lit corridors lined with tapestries depicting the history of Vel'Kari royalty. Their footsteps echoed off cold marble floors until they reached an ornate door at the end, which she pushed open. Inside were rich fabrics draped over furniture, a lavish bed adorned with fine silks and velvets that glistened under candlelight from wall sconces. Queen Lyra motioned for James to sit in one of two chairs facing each other across a small table carved from dark wood. They settled as guards took up positions outside her chambers. She leaned back, arms crossed over the throne's armrests and legs dangling elegantly off its edge. "You know what I usually find when I read minds?" she asked quietly, after some moments had passed since their arrival here alone together. James shook his head, clearing his throat before speaking up. "No, schemes," Queen Lyra began matter-of-factly, her eyes narrowing ever so slightly, as though searching for something specific in his expression or demeanor now that they were out of the public eye. "Fear, greed, desire for power, plans to manipulate me." Her voice was cold and clinical, yet there lingered an undercurrent of weariness beneath its surface, one he hadn't noticed amidst her usual regal authority earlier today when addressing him in front of court. James remained quiet through this recitation, but listened intently as she continued. "In 300 years of rule, no visitor has ever entered my throne room thinking about anything other than those base instincts. Until now." Her gaze softened briefly, violet eyes reflecting a hint of the vulnerability had sensed earlier when her thoughts were broadcasted to everyone present. She sat up straighter on her throne, regal composure slipping for just an instant before she regained control. James studied this strange alien queen who seemed both formidable and fragile at once, especially in that moment where their roles had shifted so dramatically from formal meeting to candid conversation behind closed doors. "That is really sad," he ventured finally when the silence grew too thick around them again. She laughed then, but it was bitter laughter tinged with self-deprecation rather than genuine amusement. "Sad? I am a queen," she challenged, her tone sharp yet laced with an undercurrent of vulnerability. "I have everything." James met her eyes squarely despite his own rising discomfort at the intimacy this situation had taken them into already. He understood all too well how power could isolate even the most charismatic leaders from genuine human connection, and that was something more universal than cultural barriers ever could be. "I've seen a lot of powerful people," James admitted. "Most are lonely." She studied him curiously, violet eyes narrowing thoughtfully. "Power pushes them away." He nodded in agreement before continuing softly but firmly. "Someone to talk to, someone who isn't afraid of you, someone who sees you as a person rather than just another face at court." Lyra remained silent for long moments after his words sank in. James felt the weight of her scrutiny heavy on him, like an unseen force pressing down, until finally breaking it with a sigh that carried its own sense of defeat. "You are very strange," she observed quietly, almost to herself more so than directly speaking to him. "Ambassador." James smiled slightly and shrugged modestly. "I have been told that before." Lyra stood from her throne, then approached James slowly, his heart race, not only out of fear, but anticipation too, as he watched every graceful step bring her closer, until she stopped mere inches away. Her presence was commanding, yet there was an undeniable warmth emanating off her, despite her, perhaps because of stark contrast between their species. "You thoughts are very loud," she murmured almost teasingly, though whether it was playful or genuinely curious about what ran through his mind remained unclear in that moment. James winced inwardly at the admission. "Sorry," he muttered sheepishly. "I really can't control them." She paused right before him and tilted her head curiously, as if studying some intricate puzzle set out to challenge even a queen's intellect. Then she straightened again, eyes locking onto his with renewed resolve. "Do not apologize," Lyra said firmly yet gently. "Your thoughts are weeks past since Jameis' first audience with Queen Lyra, and their meetings grew more frequent and deeper in substance. Each session would last hours, as they delved into discussions about Vel'Kari politics, culture, and history. Though he knew she could read his thoughts at any moment, James found himself unable to resist the constant stream of observations and reflections that poured through his mind whenever she was near. One evening, while walking along the palace's expansive corridors lined with ornate tapestries depicting Vel'Kari royalty, James couldn't help but think about how much work Lyra put into everything. He admired her dedication, yet worried it might be detrimental to her well-being. "She works too hard," he thought aloud one day when she was within earshot. Lyra turned sharply at his words and regarded him with an intensity that made the hairs on Jameis' neck stand up. "I see your concerns," she said, her voice tinged with a rare warmth, as they continued down the hallway to her private chambers for their usual meeting. As weeks became months, James found himself advising Lyra more than ever before, offering suggestions and insights born from his human perspective. He would often think about how lonely she must feel despite the grandeur of her position. "She needs someone," he thought one afternoon as they discussed a particularly contentious issue with Grand Vizier Kreth. The tension between James and Kreth had escalated since Lyra began to trust the ambassador more than the traditional advisor. The vizier saw his influence waning, replaced by an outsider whom many in court viewed warily due to their unique bond with the queen. His fear grew into something darker: envy and mistrust. One day during a formal assembly of Vel'Kari nobility, Kreth approached Lyra with accusations aimed directly at James. "Your Majesty," he announced loudly enough for everyone present to hear clearly, "I believe this ambassador harbors hidden motives within our halls." The room fell silent instantly, as all eyes turned towards the human and his queen. "Lies," Lyra replied coolly yet firmly, her gaze never wavering from Kreth's face. But James saw a flicker of uncertainty cross her features. She too felt the weight of these accusations, and their potential to undermine trust between them so deeply established over months of mutual respect and understanding. James stepped forward immediately, nodding respectfully at Lyra before addressing Kreth directly. "If you have doubts about my loyalty or intentions toward our beloved queen," he said calmly, but with a steely edge underpinning his words, "then let us prove it once and for all. I will undergo the deepest truth reading possible if that would ease your mind." Kreth's eyes narrowed suspiciously before he turned to Lyra. "Again you see this as acceptable?" "Agreed," she said after a moment of deliberation. The assembly cleared quickly, leaving only those most influential in attendance. As preparations began for the truth-reading ritual, which required intricate ceremonial arrangements and sacred artifacts that ensured an unbiased scan of one's deepest thoughts and memories, James felt an overwhelming surge of emotion mingled with determination to prove his sincerity towards Lyra. Once everything was set up within a specially designated chamber away from prying eyes, but surrounded by the full court as witnesses, James took position opposite where Queen Lyra stood behind her throne, like chair amidst the ancient Vel'Kari devices designed for such revelations. He met Kreth's gaze squarely, then looked to his beloved queen, whose violet eyes shone with an unreadable mix of anticipation and apprehension. "Begin," she commanded softly, yet firmly. James felt no fear as Lyra reached into his mind through their shared bond, one built on mutual respect and genuine care rather than deceitful intentions. He allowed her access to every corner of his psyche. There were no secrets here, only the truth. He wished for everyone within this room today, his childhood filled with loss, but also love learned from those around him who cared deeply, even in hard times. His career journey, through diplomacy and its many challenges, teaching resilience alongside compassion, fears about failing at protecting others like himself or Lyra now against unseen threats, both external and internal, hopes for lasting peace between humans and Vel'Kari people. But perhaps most telling were the feelings he harbored towards her, growing affections that started from respect but blossomed into something more profound. That she was beautiful, not just physically, but in spirit too, where kindness beneath regal masks revealed genuine warmth ready to be shared, if only given space, deserving of happiness instead of constant burden, shouldered alone by a queen. Lyra saw it all clearly now, within his mind's landscape open before her like an endless scroll revealing untold truths. She met James's eyes then, and spoke aloud so everyone could hear. The human has no schemes. Her words resonated through the chamber with weighty that night, as stars twinkled in the vast expanse of space visible through large windows in Queen Lyra's private chambers. Ambassador James Parker found himself standing awkwardly before her throne-sized chair. The day had been long and filled with tension. Accusations from Grand Vizier Kreth still lingered heavily between them like an unspoken specter. Lyra sat quietly for a moment, contemplating the events of the assembly that evening. She looked up at James, noticing his discomfort mixed with determination to prove himself, something she valued deeply after years surrounded by those who sought power and manipulation through her position alone. "James," she began softly but deliberately, "you could have shielded your thoughts." He nodded solemnly, understanding both the practicality of such a measure and its personal implications. "I could have," he admitted reluctantly, "but it didn't seem right to hide myself from you. You deserve honesty." Her eyes widened slightly as she regarded him more closely than ever before. A small smile tugged at her lips, unexpected but genuine in its warmth. She stood slowly, moving towards James with a grace that seemed almost otherworldly compared to his stilted movements under the scrutiny of court life. Even the embarrassing thoughts?" Lyra asked hesitantly, though she could feel them all too clearly already. James blushed deeply, but met her gaze bravely. "Especially those," he murmured. Lying to a telepath felt pointless. There was no use in denying what his mind revealed naturally. They both knew this truth intimately now. She laughed, a sound so light and free that it echoed through the room with unexpected clarity. James watched her, caught off guard by such a display of unguarded emotion from someone who rarely showed vulnerability publicly. "You are impossible," she said between bouts of laughter, her hand gently touching his face, as if confirming the reality of him standing there before her, a human diplomat, amidst Vel'Kari splendor and power dynamics. He felt her read this touch back into his mind, seeking validation that he indeed found it real and meaningful rather than an act prompted by necessity or protocol. "Impossible," James repeated with a shrug. "I've been told that quite often." Lyra's expression softened further as she leaned in close enough for him to feel the warmth of her breath against his cheek. Her fingers brushed away some loose strands from around his eyes, and he could see genuine curiosity mixed with an underlying desire. "James," she murmured softly before adding teasingly, "I am going to kiss you now." He thought immediately, "Please do." It was exactly as good, or better than anything they had imagined together over the past months of building this unique bond between a human and Vel'Kari royalty. When their lips met, it sparked an electric connection that neither could have anticipated, but both desperately wanted. Breaking apart slowly to catch breaths filled with shared revelation, Lyra spoke again. "You thought I was lonely," she whispered gently against his mouth before kissing him once more. The sensation of her words and touch resonated deeply within James, every part of him aligned in relief that what he had felt wasn't merely an illusion born out of admiration or misplaced hope. "You wish someone would make me smile," she continued softly, eyes locking onto his with unerring clarity. "You did both, without trying." James held her then securely, but gently, as if afraid to break this moment too soon, yet desperate not to let it slip away entirely, either. He thought aloud now, without any reservations. "I was just thinking what I was thinking. No grand plan." It felt like honesty itself, wrapped in a simple admission of affection and mutual respect born out of shared experiences. Lyra smiled against his lips, a rare display, openly acknowledging her own feelings alongside the weight they carried within Vel'Kari society. She pulled back slightly to look at him properly now, their eyes locked once more, before she confessed, simply but profoundly, that is exactly why it worked. In that moment, everything seemed clearer between them, barriers breaking down not just through words or actions alone, but through the understanding and acceptance of who they were beneath all pretense. James thought louder on purpose sometimes thereafter, knowing how much his thoughts meant to her, especially when they made her smile. And she always did.